So everybody knows like the general story of the Scarlet Letter, but I was kind of surprised at how different actually reading it was to how I previously learned about it. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born in Salem, Massachusetts in 1804, roughly 200 years before. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born in Salem, Massachusetts in 1804, roughly about 200 years after the peak of the American witch hunts. The Scarlet Letter was published in 1850 and received a lot of both good and bad criticism. Essayist Edwin Perry Whipple didn't like the book's morbid intensity, while English writer D.H. Lawrence applauded it as the most perfect work of American imagination. It actually began as a short story, until Hawthorne's publisher James Fields convinced him to turn it into a full-length novel. Briefly, and certainly not to justice, The Scarlet Letter is about Hester Prynne, an unmarried woman living in Puritan Massachusetts who commits adultery and is forced to wear a red letter A on her bosom to show everyone what she's done. Another more physical manifestation of the scandal is Hester's daughter, Pearl. Hester is questioned by the ministers of the town in the public square, including the man she committed the act with, Arthur Dimmesdale. She is shamed by the townspeople, holding her daughter and wearing her scarlet letter on her dress. Hester looks to the back of the crowd to see her ex-husband and physician, Roger Chillingworth, staring her down. Later, she secretly meets with him, and he warns her that if he ever found out who she slept with, he would destroy him. As Pearl grows up, she gets more and more unruly, and much to Hester's dismay, she becomes obsessed with the letter on her mother's chest, demanding to know who her real father is. When the townspeople conclude that Pearl should be taken from her, Minister Dimmesdale persuades the governor to let Hester keep their daughter. All the while, Dimmesdale keeps clutching at his chest, as if something was burning in the same place as Hester's letter. As the years go by and the minister's health begins to deteriorate, the townspeople welcome Chillingworth as he takes care of Dimmesdale. Chillingworth believes that he is Pearl's real father, as one night he pulls back the minister's shirt to reveal an A burned into his chest. Hester and Dimmesdale reunite under moonlight, and he tells her he wishes he could publicly face his shame like she did. They devise a plan to escape to Europe, but on election day, Dimmesdale climbs the same scaffold Hester was made to stand on, confessing his sin, and ultimately dying in the arms of his lover and his daughter. Chillingworth passes away soon after, leaving Hester and Pearl a large inheritance, and Hester dies years later, remembered as a respected person of the community, separate from her Scarlet Letter. There's a version in the preface of the edition that came out a few years after the first edition was published, in which Hawthorne makes some pretty comical remarks. Much to the author's surprise, and, if he may say so without additional offense, considerably to his amusement, he finds that his sketch of an official life, introductory to the Scarlet Letter, has created an unprecedented excitement in the respectable community immediately around him. He conceives that it could not have been done in a better or kindlier spirit, nor, so far as his abilities availed, with a livelier effect of truth. The author is constrained, therefore, to republish his introductory sketch without the change of a word. So right off the bat, we can see that Hawthorne is a little bit more modest than you usually see in male writers around this time. The reader can tell by his preface that he was never really sure of his novel, even up till his death, though the book has gone on to become one of the most infamous ninth grade summer reading books. He does two really interesting things when he introduces his protagonist, Hester. One, he makes sure she's clearly a protagonist, set against the clearly male antagonist, Chillingworth. Even though now Hester is the town harlot and she's made to wear this letter, she becomes this holy image to the people in her town, never really changing her dress from her covered Puritan style to symbolize changing herself, or steering into the skid and committing her sin even more. Throughout the book, she simply remains Hester, now with her daughter Pearl, and earns the respect of the people back through her hard work and kindness. The second thing he does with Hester is tell the reader that the letter A has transfigured her, not exactly changed her. Though the townspeople's intention is to make her into this living sin, this breathing example of what not to do and who not to look up to, Hester quietly rejects the stigma and instead makes it into this positive trait. She embellishes the letter with gold embroidering, helps the town people make clothes, and fiercely takes care of Pearl, even though the people whisper about her daughter being the devil. By the time her daughter grows up and leaves the town, Hester has become completely separated from her defining punishment, earning back the respect of the townspeople who forget her sin as the years go on. Pearl is her illegitimate child, and Hester, often dressed in white, she can ultimately be seen as this sort of godlike or Christ figure, with the ability to see into others' hearts and forgive them due to her own transgression and experience. The prefix trans in Latin means the ability to alter and therefore determine meaning. As Hester is transfigured by the letter, she also fights to transfigure the letter itself. Hester tries and succeeds in a place where many men would have rather seen her perish, and never really resorts to any malicious deeds to realize that. Dimmesdale, on the other hand, chooses to hide his love from Hester from the townspeople since he's this young, respected minister, even though he experiences this similar punishment as she does on his own chest, and it's more physical. Likewise, Chillingworth was really obsessed with knowing Hester's secret. Both of these male antagonists in the book are pretty much destroyed by their own secrecy and guilt. Not Hester. For a female character written by a man, which is something, we have to keep remembering, Hester Prynne is not too bad. In fact, she might be the closest character to a real woman written by a man in American fictitious literature during that time. Obviously, of course, excluding, feminist female writers. Simply due to the fact that she's not really special, despite her punishment. He stresses that he's telling someone else's story, and though feminism wouldn't really begin as a movement for another 100 years or so, he wrote the book partly as a response to his ancestors participating in the American witch hunts. They were in Salem, after all. My take is that, Hawthorne wrote the book as this notion that women shouldn't really be publicly shamed for committing adultery, especially if they're unmarried anyway, when it takes two to tango and it makes the man just as guilty. Beginning as a literal woman being judged on the stand and finishing as a respected member of the community, Hester's not transformed by the letter, but she transforms herself because of it. As Catherine Harrison puts it in one of the introductions to one of these editions, even as Hester is saved by her openness, the daily confession of her life, Chillingworth and Dimmesdale are destroyed by their own secrecy. Scarlet Letter really kind of remains just as relevant today as it was 200 years ago. Women are not really burned at the stake anymore for being witches here. But we're still shamed and hunted and killed and raped for reasons similar and just as stupid. Hawthorne's novel deserves to be read for two reasons. One, it's it's a great book. It's funny, and everyone you want to get comeuppance gets it. And the reader finds herself cheering for Hester almost from the get-go, even though the townspeople are made to hate her. But number two, most importantly, Scarlet Letter remains relevant as a near-perfect work of American literature because those who don't read the novel categorize Hester as this woman with the red A on her chest or something. When in reality, she can't really be shoehorned into one personality or description because that's the point. She's a woman, she's a person, and you only get the full story if you listen to her. So, does public shaming work? Has it ever worked? Will it ever work? Jim McGreevey is an American politician, best known for his role as New Jersey governor from 2002 to 2004. He was also a former assistant prosecutor, executive director to the state parole board, which will be important in a few minutes. He was elected over Brett Schundler by a huge margin, but after only 2 years in office, he resigned in a really peculiar way. He was accused of corruption and making some awful cabinet appointments, but his resignation speech in August 2004 included a bit of a different story. Instead of responding to the corruption allegations, McGreevey came out as gay and revealed a secret relationship between him and Israeli Homeland Security advisor Golan Sepel. There's a bunch of stuff surrounding this, like Sepel's lawyer threatening sexual harassment against him and the fact that a vacant seat meant a violation of New Jersey's voting rights, and the list goes on. The most important thing was that he was seriously accused of corruption, and he kind of distracted the nation away from it by coming out and never accepted total and complete responsibility for his actions. After the speech and resignation, he checked himself into a psychiatric hospital in Arizona, and he was diagnosed with PTSD. There's a lot to say here about, gay people and representation, but I'm straight, and that's not really what the book is about. Imagine this. You're 9, sitting in a New York restaurant having breakfast with your dad, when this guy rushes up to you almost out of breath. It's not a lot of other people in there, and you look at your dad worriedly, and the man approaches you too. He catches his breath, and he yells at you, "Study hard at math!" Then sits down at a table nearby. He takes out his phone and he barks, "Did you do 10 strong powerfuls last night? Word of honor? Good for you! Love you! Bye!" Genuinely, how would you react to something aggressively nice like that? I don't think I'd forget it. So, McGreevey was an assistant prosecutor, or as he liked to label it, a prosecutor's prosecutor. When he was working in Middlesex County, he talked about how he would never even really look at the stories of prisoners who had made a case for being pardoned. Not only was the process for requesting a pardon complicated on purpose, but McGreevey was a dick, too. He even voted against gay rights, and we talk about repression. In Jon Ronson's book, So you've been publicly shamed. He updates us on what McGreevey's been up to for the past few years. Running a therapeutic prison reform program in Hudson County Correctional Center in Kearney, New Jersey. Walking through the halls, McGreevey tells Ronson that a normal prison is the worst form of punishment because, day in, day out, people find themselves virtually doing nothing in a very negative environment. Inmates tell me time and time again they feel themselves shutting down. James Gilligan, psychiatrist and author of a series of books about the American prison system titled Violence, was working at Harvard in the 70s when he was asked to help Bridgewater State Hospital investigate the reasons why so many prisoners were dying by theirs or someone else's hands at an alarming rate. He was told pretty much that, they thought they were all just crazy prisoners who had weird mental disorders. We just couldn't handle it. We just don't know what's going on. Things he heard from murderers, though, who had been in jail for years were a little bit more harrowing. The men would all say that they had died. They themselves had died before they started killing people. What they meant was that their personalities had died. They had no capacity for feelings. Some have told me that their bodies are empty or filled with straw, not flesh and blood. That instead of having veins and nerves, they have ropes and cords. After decades of very similar accounts, Gilligan came up with this final hypothesis that one thing each prisoner had in common was this intolerable, almost chronic feeling of shame. Each criminal had experienced shame so intense that many felt they could never be fixed. Prison conditions obviously didn't really help either. Beratement and belittlement from correctional officers, as well as physical and emotional separation from family and friends, only really added to this feeling of permanently irreversible social isolation and mortification. In the 80s, Gilligan began this therapy/de-shaming program in Massachusetts prisons that followed this really simple tagline of, treat prisoners with respect. Gilligan wanted to expand the program into providing college classes for prisoners. However, William Weld, the governor of Massachusetts, denied the program in 1991, saying it would cause poor people to commit crimes to go to college for free. The book is not mainly about therapeutic prisons or New Jersey governors, it's about social media mainly. But the overarching theme is shame, obviously, and the way it affects us. Ronson uses this extreme real-world example of the US prison system and compares it to the way we shame people online. Not for huge crimes like genocide or rape, but making a joke at the wrong time. Justine Sacco sent this famous tweet a few years ago, and hours later she was fired from her job and had become the top trending topic on Twitter. People were sending her death threats, tweeting about how she should be fired, assaulted, how she herself deserved to get AIDS because of this tweet. It's obviously not really in good taste, and people thought they were doing a really good thing by publicly shaming her. However, as economist Jonathan Hirsch writes, something about this story resonated with them. So much they felt compelled to Google her name. If interest in Justine was sufficient to encourage users to stay online for more time than they would otherwise, this would have directly resulted in Google making more money on ad revenue. Doing some rough calculations out, he estimated that Google made about $120,000 just from people sending negative tweets about Justine Sacco. The people sending the tweets rightfully shaming her didn't see this money, Google did. When we denounce things and people and situations like tweets on the internet, we create these feedback loops of our own content, instant real-time feedback on your social behavior that forces you to change it. Your speed signs are a good example. They tell you how fast you're going, but not to give you a ticket, just to have you monitor your own speed. And people do slow down after these signs are placed in areas with speeding problems, because others are watching, Ronson argues to an extent that he sees that this is what's being done on social media. Twitter picks up and passes information around, something people know others in their network will enjoy, you posting a tweet, which in turn gets liked by those in your network. The information makes the network like the person more, say if it were a funny joke or something, and so the information becomes more of a social currency. This makes it really hard for challenging views of the accepted position. When someone says something or does something that disturbs the agreed protocols of the system, the other parts react furiously and try to eject that destabilizing fragment. And so the idea that there is another world of other people who have other ideas is marginalized in our lives. So You've Been Publicly Shamed is about the severe punishment that we dole out to each other online at those who might not really be totally deserving of it. And we forget in our quest to destroy internet trolls that humans are not really perfect and we all make mistakes. Calling someone out for morally questionable behavior at one point in time doesn't really mean you'll be righteous and perfect forever. At the same time, sending a tweet in bad taste doesn't mean you'll be evil forever. I mean, if I asked anybody who watched this video to send me a full history of their Facebook post from, back in 2008, so I could read them in front of a crowd of people that you know, your friends and family and relatives, would you let me read that? I don't think so. I don't think you would let me do that. People spend a lot of time sending Sacco and a lot of other people countless death threats over bad jokes. Meanwhile, prisoners, some of whom are either innocent, wrongly convicted, too harshly punished, or in jail for things that are legal now, are belittled and guilted and shamed to a point where forgiveness does not feel possible anymore. Only in the former situation is the actual shaming considered brave and the right thing to do. People like Gilligan, McGreevey, and Ronson, and a few others have begun to see beyond the hive mind culture of internet to arrive at a conclusion that will force us to think a little bit more about the way we are shaming others and cancel culture. If de-shaming would work for formerly violent criminals, if it would restore people like them to health, then we need to think twice about raining down vengeance and anger as our default position online. I hope you enjoyed this take on public shaming. Leave a comment because I'm sure I missed a lot of interesting stuff in both of these books. I'm hoping to get one more book review video out before the end of the year, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.